This is Roger. I want to talk about the emotional side of a cancer diagnosis. One of the first things I did when I was diagnosed is I reached out to other cancer patients, in particular looking for long-term survivors. And one of the things one of them told me is that a couple of them used this phrase. They said, "You've now joined a club that nobody wants to join." And it really is like a club. And it's one of those things I hate to say, gee, you can't understand. But you really can't understand until you've been told by a doctor that you're, like I was, that you are extremely likely to die very soon in a very painful way. It really kind of changes everything. And so my immediate reaction was to seek out survivors and find out how people have beat this or at least turned it into a chronic disease. And pancreatic cancer survivors are a little hard to find, I'll admit. And the first one I talked to, his advice to me, the first thing he said was, "You'll never buy another shoes again. You're just not going to look that far ahead," which is kind of a jarring thought. But coincidentally, I had just returned a pair of boots I'd bought that day, so it was kind of like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. That was not a very good first person to talk to because he was pretty pessimistic about prospects. He viewed himself as being very lucky. And I asked him, "What did you do to survive?" And he said, "I was just lucky." And I talked to a lot of survivors, and oddly, I couldn't, because I was looking for that magic bullet. Like, what did you do? Did you drink a lot of tea? I mean, did you lie on the beach in Mexico and drink fruit juice like Steve Jobs? I mean, what did you do to survive? What is the magic bullet that, the other people didn't get? And I couldn't find it. Because everybody was so different. Some people, they just trusted their doctor. Some people viewed they're lucky. Most people, I would say, just really, really doubled down on as many therapies as possible. That's my approach. And tried as many things as they could, provided there's no downside effect. And that is my approach, by the way. If it might help and will not hurt, I will do it. If it might help and might hurt, I won't do it. I mean, the chemo was the exception, and I don't know if I'd even do that again if I had to do it over. But anyway, the one commonality I did find among the survivors was a certain perspective, and it's a perspective and an attitude I think that comes from getting that sort of diagnosis. Now, there used to be, developed at Stanford, the idea that there was a type C personality, C for cancer, and it was the type C person that was most likely to get cancer, and it had to do with, I guess, certain lack of assertiveness or willingness to go along with things or willing to just accept stress. Well, I've come across a type S personality, S for survivor. And what I found among survivors fairly consistently was two things that might seem dissonant, but actually are not. And you kind of have to be there to understand why they're not. The one is an acceptance of death. That's the first part. Just because until you just accept the fact that things might end fairly quickly, you can't get over the fear. If you don't get over the fear, you don't get over the cortisol and the adrenaline that's going to drive, the IGF, et cetera, it drives the cancer in effect. So you got to get over the fear as much as possible, and that requires an acceptance of death. But at the same time, a non-acceptance of death, an absolute commitment to fighting it. And the people I talked to were absolutely convinced that they could fight it. So eventually, maybe not at first, maybe it took a while, and that was the type S personality. And I described that to people, and they're like, how can you accept death and fight death at the same time? But I ask cancer patients, and they know exactly what I mean. So it's resilience. And that was the kind of resilience that I found in all these people. So the other part of this that I'd like to mention here is that as impactful as this is on the individual, far more impactful on the people around you than you might expect. And that was kind of a surprise to me because it's easy to be a little bit self-focused at a time like that. It took me about 12 hours to kind of go through all the stages of grief, but certainly it took a lot longer for everybody else around me. And it was very difficult, I would say, for my family to watch me go through chemo because for me, I knew I was going to come out on the other end, but they watched me lose 30 pounds, lose my hair, be nauseous all the time, spontaneously have, bleeding in my nose, just for no reason. I mean, I just look terrible. They tell me that now. And for me, I just wasn't that aware of how this was impacting people around me. So if I had to do it over again, I would probably be, I would probably be a little less expressive about the whole treatment, because it's hard. It's hard on people to watch. Reaction of my clients. I'm a lawyer, and my daughter used to joke that I've never really had any friends. I just had business associates, because she'd sit in my, she'd come to me to meetings and be in my car when I'd have phone calls and things, and I hang up and she'd say, "You can't possibly like that person. They're so obnoxious," stuff like that. So anyway, we put her theory to the test, because I felt like it was important for me to tell people that I had this cancer. I felt it was my obligation. And she was right. There were several people that kind of surprised me as how quickly they distanced themselves from me, and that's fine. If you don't want me, then I don't want you around either. But then other people went the other way. In fact, I had two clients that just started crying when I told them, which was kind of awkward to have two grown men crying in your office, and that came as quite a surprise too. So it was kind of all over the place. I guess the best response is I do venture capital work, and one of my VC clients, I told him, and he says, I said, "Look, I'm going to have to hand you off. I'm going into surgery. Doc says I have to take a month off, and I can't do any work, so I'm going to have to hand you off." And he says, "Geez, I've been with you 20 years. I really don't want you to hand me off." He says, "I mean, you're a dying breed." And we stopped and thought about that for a minute, and both started laughing. And it's the kind of joke I wish I had made, So it was kind of all over the place. A cancer patient has to be super careful with humor, because what we can accept, other people around us might not think is too funny, morbid type humor. And I've heard that from other cancer patients as well. After I saw my doctor, my brother called me up, and he said, "Well, what did the doctor say?" And I said, "Well, the good news is you don't have to worry about buying me a Christmas present this year. I promise you no one's going to laugh at that joke, so don't make that one." The only person who really sort of got it was my daughter, because she had sort of the same perspective as me, and I'm sure to the outside world it would look really callous and cruel, but in our family it's how we show support. Like, we drive along and she would say things like, "Man," she says, "could you at least outlive this car lease, because I don't want to be seen driving this to school." And that might sound callous, but in our family that's a show of support, But we did have a lot of serious conversations. It really changed the nature of our conversations. We spent a lot of time talking about the nature of pain, because she saw me every day during this process, and how much pain is too much? Is physical pain worse than psychic pain? What can we do to manage pain? And she even gave me a reading list of things I could do on how to get over fear, and Krishnamurti certainly has helped me do that. How to get over pain. John Kabat-Zinn has helped me do that. How to deal with the poor prognosis, and Stephen Jay Gould has helped me do that. So if you reach out to the masters, you'll find resources. And fortunately, I had my daughter there to actually talk with me about that, because nobody else was going to, except possibly a therapist. And I want to mention therapy, because I think for some people, therapy is a great idea. Do that. I'm sure it'll help. For other people, maybe not so much. Well, for me, I had used neurolinguistic programming just in my negotiations, and I have used CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, in performance and trying to get to be a better, marathoner or whatever. So I was familiar with these techniques. So I did at one point during the process, I noticed that I was always angry and always frustrated, and it just occurred to me, because some of the best advice I got was from my older brother, who told me, he says, "Look, you can't trust your judgment right now. You're going through too much." And so it occurred to me, it seems to me like these people want me to die. And that just can't be true. The system can't be this messed up. I mean, forgetting to schedule my surgery, not being able to get me in for treatment, just missing appointments, just on and on and on. The system the insurance companies denying pretty much every other claim that I made, fighting with me on just such basic stuff that you wouldn't believe they would fight. The system can't be, the big pharma companies being able to deliver this drug to me, but simply refusing to. I mean, it can't, the FDA not approving things that have no downside and tremendous upside. The system can't be this messed up. It's got to be me. And because of those frustrations, I was angry all the time, and I know my cortisol was high, and I know that drives cancer growth. So I decided I definitely do need to see a therapist. And I want to use CBT to figure out what's going on here and how to deal with this. And I think it's a matter of opinion who converted who in those therapy sessions, because by the end of it, she agreed with me that my indignation was righteous. I had reason to be concerned, and that dialing my anger back to zero would probably not be a good thing, because I needed to be vigilant. But we did come up with some tools and techniques for me not to just be at 100% every time something went wrong, and to at least acknowledge that people were not trying to kill me. They just couldn't do much better given how the system was put together. Meditation is the only thing that I found that can lower cortisol, and I had a very good meditation practice for a while. I've kind of fallen away from that lately because I just haven't felt anxious now in probably a year. But during the chemo, I certainly did, and I did have a meditation practice. I think that kept my cortisol down. And overall, I think the emotional side of this is something we'll talk about a lot. I think it's something that's different for every person, and definitely something that needs to be addressed, just like other personalized medicine, in a very personalized way, because I think everybody's going to find their own path to resilience.